4:16 a.m. The city's horizon dies in a single breath, like a candle pinched by wet fingers. Street lights blink once, twice, then vanish, leaving only stars that nobody trusts anymore. Somewhere downtown, a transformer screams, and the sound travels through concrete like a toothache. Phones buzz at the same moment, a synchronized spasm, then screens go black to conserve power. In apartments, refrigerators stop humming, and the sudden silence feels like pressure on eardrums. Dogs begin barking at nothing, because they can hear the grid's last dying oscillation. An air raid siren starts up late, like it woke from a coma and forgot the year. The sound rolls over rooftops in slow rising cycles, turning streets into a single frightened lung. People stand in doorways, frozen, waiting for an explanation that never arrives. Across the river, the emergency broadcast towers keep transmitting, but the words arrive mangled. A calm voice repeats, "This is a test," then stutters, then becomes a long electronic moan. Every screen that still works shows the same gray banner, and nothing else. At the National Operations Center, fluorescent lights stay on, powered by diesel and habit. Operators stare at a wall of maps that update too fast and too wrong to be real. A red icon appears over a dam, then over a refinery, then over a missile warning radar. The worst part is not the darkness. The worst part is the timing. It happens during a routine readiness drill, when everyone is already pretending to be afraid. Now the drill is gone, and the fear remains, with no safe word to end it. As the world holds its breath, where will anyone be when the lights refuse to return? The answer is ugly, because it begins the same way for every household. In that instant, the old world doesn't just end. A new, harder one begins. The trigger is small, almost insulting in its simplicity, like a typo that learns to kill. A contractor uploads a patch to a regional grid controller, signed with a valid certificate. Inside the patch, a single unit flag flips, and every sensor begins lying by a factor of 4. In the control room, engineers watch voltage readouts that look normal because they are scaled wrong. They send commands to stabilize frequency, but the commands land like punches in the wrong direction. The CETA screens glow green while breakers trip in the field, one substation at a time. The public sees none of it. The public sees only a blackout and then a siren. News anchors keep smiling for a few minutes, waiting for producers to whisper what to say. When the studio lights dim, even the anchors realize nobody is driving the narrative. And the defense network, a separate system, receives the same poisoned telemetry. It interprets a phantom surge as sabotage, then flags a coordinated strike on critical nodes. A protocol tree begins executing itself because humans taught it to value speed over doubt. In a buried launch control center, 2 officers read a message that is both routine and impossible. The console shows confirm track, and the track is a blip that should not exist. Their hands hover, trained to move before the brain fully understands. In the Capitol, leadership gathers behind blast doors that close with a sound like judgment. A general points at a map and says Article 5 as if the words can summon clarity. A minister asks for proof, and the room answers with silence and low mechanical fan noise. Outside that room, the country continues to sleep, unaware that clocks are being rewound. A commuter train sits dead on the tracks, doors locked, air stale, passengers sweating in the dark. A hospital generator kicks in, then begins rationing power like it is rationing oxygen. The information gap widens like a crack in ice under a crowd. Local police radios work for an hour, then channels clog with panic and crossed signals. Cell towers overload and die, one sector at a time, like drowning men letting go. At 5:03 a.m., an automated alert pushes to the remaining phones that have battery left. It reads, "Seek shelter, stay indoors, await further instructions." It offers no reason because the system was never designed to explain itself. Panic does not require details. Panic only requires permission. People begin driving with half-full tanks, not toward safety, but toward movement. Intersections become negotiations, then conflicts, then still life scenes of bent metal. On the outskirts, gas stations go quiet when pumps lock and card readers refuse to wake. Drivers argue with clerks who can only shrug because the register is just a dead rectangle. Someone breaks a window, and the first theft of the new era looks embarrassingly ordinary. In supermarkets, the shelves empty in minutes, not because supply fails, but because trust fails. Carts fill with water and batteries and canned food like the shoppers are building tiny lifeboats. A woman cries over infant formula because the future suddenly feels personal. Phase I ends the moment the first official statement lands. It is a single sentence pushed through a government website that loads once, then fails. We are experiencing a cyber incident. Remain calm. The words feel like a joke. Phase II begins with physics, because physics does not read press releases. Grid frequency slips below the safe band, and protective relays begin isolating regions automatically. Islands of power form, then collapse, each one taking another layer of normal life with it. ATMs freeze mid-transaction, trapping cash behind glass like museum artifacts. Elevators stop between floors, and emergency call buttons ring into nothing. In high-rises, water pressure fades as pumps lose power, leaving taps coughing air. Traffic lights die, and headlights become the only moving color in the street. Ambulances try to push through intersections, but drivers cannot see the siren's authority. The city becomes a maze of honking, then a maze of stalled cars and shouting. The first fires start small because human error loves candles during blackouts. A knocked-over flame meets a curtain, and the curtain meets a hallway full of trapped smoke. Sprinkler systems fail where water pressure fails, and alarms chirp like helpless birds. Police dispatch loses computer-aided routing and returns to paper maps and memory. Calls come in faster than voices can answer, and response times become a cruel lottery. When officers arrive, they find crowds, not culprits, because everyone is both. At a water treatment plant, chlorine dosing pumps stop, then restart at the wrong rate. Operators see normal numbers because the numbers are scaled wrong, again, still wrong. By noon, the city's water tastes metallic, and nobody knows whether to drink it. In the control room, the engineers finally realize the unit mismatch, but realization is not reversal. They attempt a rollback, but the patch has already replicated across redundant servers. Every fix triggers a new fault, like pulling one thread from a loaded parachute. On the eastern seaboard, a coastal radar station reports a fast-moving object over open water. It might be a meteor or a glitch or something nobody wants to name out loud. The watch officer files it, and the system flags it as possible hypersonic profile. In the underground launch center, the officers receive an elevated posture update. The message is formatted perfectly because machines are still polite when they are wrong. One officer whispers, "This is how accidents start," and nobody laughs. Somewhere else, a foreign command post receives its own distorted telemetry. Their analysts see the blackout as preparation for a first strike, because history teaches suspicion. They begin dispersing aircraft and loading munitions, actions that look like intent from above. In the capital, diplomats attempt to open hotlines, but the lines route through dead exchanges. They try satellites, but ground terminals are jammed by the sheer number of desperate calls. The world's great powers stare at each other through fogged glass, guessing shapes. By late afternoon, the dam begins to matter, because water does not care about cyber wars. Its spillway gates are motor-driven, and the motors do not like unstable power. A supervisory command tells them to open, but the scaled value is too small to save anything. Behind the concrete face, water rises by centimeters each minute, steady and patient. A sensor alarms, but the alarm is filtered out as non-critical by a compromised rule set. Downstream towns continue cooking dinner because they have not been told to fear the river. At 6:41 p.m., the dam's crest lights go out, and with them the last human reassurance. A maintenance crew hears a low groan, like the structure is clearing its throat. Hairline fractures propagate, invisible, until they become the only story. The failure is not cinematic, it is administrative. A request for emergency gate override sits in a queue, waiting for a digital signature. The signature server is offline, and the queue becomes a coffin for thousands of people. When the dam wall gives, it does not explode. It unravels like fabric under tension. A section slumps forward, and the reservoir pours through the gap like a punched lung. A brown, foaming wall of water forms, accelerates, and chooses its victims with blind geometry. Downstream, the first impact arrives as vibration, then as a roar that drowns out thought. Sirens in the river valley activate, but many are grid-powered and already dead. Those who hear anything hear only distant shouting and the growing roar of moving debris. The first houses vanish under water as if erased, leaving only bubbles and splintered wood. Emergency managers request helicopters, but aviation fuel is rationed and comms are unstable. Rescue teams stage at high ground, then realize roads are gone, bridges eaten, maps obsolete. A man climbs a tree with his child, and the tree becomes a temporary nation. On social media, the first videos upload, then stop, because the networks collapse under demand. People watch pixelated clips of flooding and whisper, "That can't be here," like denial is armor. They do not know that here is shrinking, because disaster makes every place adjacent. A rumor becomes a map, and the map becomes a stampede route through streets with no lights. Night falls, and without street lights, the city feels abandoned, even when it is full. In the dark, people misjudge distances, misread faces, and invent threats from normal shadows. The only steady sound is footfalls, and the occasional crackle of handheld radios. Phase 2 tightens when food delivery fails, because the modern city is a warehouse with legs. Warehouses cannot ship when diesel pumps are locked and electronic manifests cannot load. By day 2, restaurants close, then pharmacies, then anything that relies on refrigeration. Hospitals triage by flashlight. Surgeons move slower because they cannot afford one mistake. Dialysis patients are told to wait, and waiting becomes another word for dying. Ambulances run only for the loudest emergencies, because silence now hides casualties. In neighborhoods, people form watch groups not to be heroic, but to feel less alone. They tape paper signs to doors listing medical skills, weapons, spare water, and threats. The street becomes a committee, and committees make enemies as fast as they make plans. At a distribution hub, a private security team blocks the gate and claims critical infrastructure. Locals argue that their children are also critical infrastructure, and the words ignite into shouting. A warning shot cracks the air, and then the next shot finds flesh, because fear aims faster than reason. Afterward, nobody remembers who fired first, only that the line for food turned into a firing line. By day 3, the government attempts a press conference, but the feed drops every minute. A spokesperson promises restoration, yet cannot explain why the grid refuses synchronization. Viewers begin to understand that leadership is also blind, just better sheltered. Phase 3 begins when the first households accept that tomorrow is not a guarantee. Generators become currency, and fuel becomes the new law, measured in liters and bullets. Batteries are traded like contraband, because light is now a privilege. Those who prepared become quiet. Those who did not become loud. Prepared people move at dawn, avoiding crowds, carrying water like they carry secrets. Unprepared people gather at official aid points, then learn that aid depends on logistics. Information becomes the invisible threat because rumors travel faster than any rescue convoy. One voice claims a nuclear strike is imminent. Another claims the blackout is permanent. Each rumor feels like certainty, and certainty feels like relief, even when it is poison. In military headquarters, planners consider retaliatory options, then consider the cost of guessing wrong. They run simulations, but simulations require clean inputs, and the inputs are contaminated. A commander repeats, "Do not launch on a glitch," as if repetition can anchor reality. Still, the warning networks keep chirping. Radar returns come and go like hallucinations. A blip appears over the ocean, then splits into 3, then vanishes when a filter resets. Each false alarm burns decision-makers' nerves the way radiation burns cells. At the same time, foreign media broadcasts images of troop movements and strategic dispersal. The pictures might be routine, but the timing makes them feel like a countdown to something irreversible. Alliances convene in secure rooms, and every meeting ends with fewer certainties and more contingency plans. In the public mind, movement equals intent, and intent becomes a story nobody can disprove. In the blackout zones, a new map forms, not of counties, but of working generators. Apartment blocks with rooftop solar become islands of light, guarded like fortresses. Dark blocks become hunting grounds for theft, because desperation is a predictable predator. Water becomes the next fracture line. People stop trusting taps and start trusting each other less. Boiling becomes ritual, and bleach becomes medicine, and every sip feels like a decision. Parents ration water to children first, then realize they are teaching a new kind of arithmetic. At night, fires mark the city like flares, and smoke becomes a compass for everyone who is hunting. Some fires are accidents, some are signals, and some are messages nobody wants to decode. The sky above the city glows faint orange, even without power, like a bruise that refuses to fade. In that light, every moving silhouette looks guilty, and every closed door looks like a lie. Downstream of the dam breach, the flood leaves behind silt, chemicals, and a silent inventory. Cars sit upside down in trees. Refrigerators rest in fields like white tombstones. The smell is mud, gasoline, and rot layered together until breathing feels like swallowing. National Guard units deploy, but deployment is slow when fuel comes and roads are compromised. They establish checkpoints, then realize checkpoints become targets for every angry person. Rules of engagement become daily negotiations between restraint and survival. A temporary currency appears. Printed receipts, canned goods, shotgun shells, battery packs. Banks remain locked and savings becomes a memory people tell themselves to stay sane. Every transaction is a trust fall, and nobody wants to hit the ground. In a coastal city, a desalination plant shuts down, and the mayor whispers evacuation into a dead handset. But evacuation requires transport, and transport requires fuel, and fuel requires order that no longer exists. Order is the first thing that vanished at 4:16 a.m., and it does not come back on a schedule. So families pack anyway, because doing nothing feels like choosing to be left behind. In the launch control center, the alert level edges upward, then holds, then edges again. 2 officers eat cold rations and stare at screens that might be lying to them. They are trained to obey, but obedience feels like a gamble with the planet. A junior analyst finally traces the origin, a supply chain compromise in the update server. He drafts a report, but the report must root through approvals that no longer respond. Bureaucracy becomes a second disaster, slower than the first, but just as lethal. Engineers attempt a manual grid restart, black starting plants in a strict sequence. But the dam breach has flooded a gas compressor station, and the pipeline loses pressure. A turbine trips again, and the restart plan collapses like a ladder missing rungs. In cities, people begin sleeping in shifts. One person sleeps while another listens. They listen for footsteps, for sirens, for the long quiet that means something worse. Sleep becomes tactical, and dreams become surveillance footage. On day 7, rain falls, and everyone stares at it like it is a chemical weapon. They remember old disasters and old words like fallout, even without proof. Children ask why the sky tastes different, and adults have no vocabulary left. The government releases a longer statement, finally admitting multiple cascading failures. It lists cyber intrusion, a unit conversion error, compromised SCADA rules, and infrastructure fatigue. It reads like an autopsy while the patient is still screaming for help. In kitchens and shelters, people hear the subtext. Nobody is in control, only in charge of updates. The truth is simple. Every system assumed another system would catch the mistake. Every department assumed another department would share the warning. Every designer assumed humans would act rationally under pressure, and humans never do. Resolution arrives without celebration because survival does not clap. Power returns to some districts in thin, unreliable pulses, like a heart restarting after a rest. When lights flicker on, people cry, then immediately charge phones because habits die last. In other districts, power never returns because floodwater has ruined substations beyond repair. Rebuilding requires parts, and parts require factories, and factories require power. The loop is cruelly elegant, a closed circuit of failure. A memorial forms at the river valley, where mud still stains the high water line. Names are written on plywood with marker, because stone is for later if later exists. The dead are counted twice, once by officials, and once by empty chairs at dinner.